The history of the U.S. labor movement is pretty lengthy. We're looking at the mid to late 1800s when this country really first became industrialized. Um, for as long as people have been working for a living, especially in an industrial setting, the bosses have tried to do everything they can to exploit people for maximum profit. And that's really where the labor movement began, was on those shop floors. One of the most important events in early labor history was something called the Haymarket Affair. The Haymarket Affair happened in Chicago on May 4th, 1886. Some of you might be aware of a holiday started in this country. It's called May Day. That is really the precursor to Labor Day. May Day is really an international holiday that started in the United States, celebrating working people, and it sprung from the Haymarket Affair, also known as the Haymarket Massacre. Essentially, it was a strike organized by the Federation of Organized Trade and Labor Unions for the 8-hour day. The demand was the 8-hour workday. What ultimately happened, a peaceful protest devolved into an individual that supposedly threw a bomb. Several police officers were killed. And in the aftermath, 8 anarchists that were somewhat involved, were given show trials and essentially immediately hung. Some were put in prison for life. But out of that struggle, that's how we won the 8-hour day. And there's still a statue in the Haymarket Square in Chicago. One of the next really important events in labor history actually deals with our union, the Teamsters Union. The Teamsters began in the late 1880s, 1890s. It did originally begin as a craft union. Teamsters drove teams of pack animals between cities delivering goods, beer, food, construction materials, etc. And that's why we have 2 horses as our logo. That harkens back to that history of being workers that drove animals between towns. Probably one of the most important strikes in U.S. history, especially for the Teamsters, which was the Minneapolis General Strike of 1934. The Minneapolis General Strike saw the entire town of Minneapolis shut down. It originally became a strike from the Teamsters local there that then spread to the rest of the unions. It actually lasted from May 16th, 1934 to August 21st, 1934. And the 1934 Minneapolis strike is largely credited with building this union. This is really important for those of you that are working here in North Carolina, is right to work. Right to work essentially came from the Taft-Hartley Act. That's why we have it here legally. The Taft-Hartley Act was passed in 1947. It was vetoed by President Harry Truman, who was actually also, ironically, the first president to use it. But the biggest thing about right to work was originated by a man named, he's an American businessman named Vance Muse. Vance Muse was born in 1890 in Texas, and he died in 1950. So he did see his goal of right to work implemented in the United States. Vance Muse was a white supremacist who took exception to black folks and white folks being in the same organizations. He used a segregationist view against unionization. He was also a businessman, so of course he was anti-union from the sake of being a businessman. But his primary problem was that white men and white women would be forced to call black people brother or sister, lose their jobs. And that's why Vance Muse fought against the closed shop. The closed shop is the concept of you must be a member of this union to work in this facility. And ultimately, Vance Muse was successful in getting right to work passed. Right to work, as many of you know, it allows members to enjoy the benefits of the union negotiated contract without paying dues. even in the so-called closed shop states and other parts of the country, particularly in the Northeast, members can opt out of being a member, but they have to pay their fair share. But in North Carolina, for example, and South Carolina, a member has it, or excuse me, a individual working in that shop has every right not to pay dues. And something that when we talk to some of our non-members that, want to argue that they have the right not to pay dues, that is legally true. It is important to remind folks that really the origins of right to work are rooted in the racism of Vance Muse.